This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church. And today I am joined by our children's pastor, Jessica Beha, and our intern, Aleigha. And today's going to be a little bit different, but before we go any further, I want to make sure that if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do that. That way you don't miss out on any new content. So Sunday, we are in our Red Letter series, and Pastor Scott preached about cultural Christianity, and the message was kind of heavy and kind of hard to hear possibly for a lot of people. And so with Pastor Scott being out of town and us being here and the way that this message was, we thought what better way than to just kind of have a conversation about how it hit us. And how it can really apply to our lives and maybe how we see it playing out for other people as well, because it can be a little bit difficult or a little easy to kind of like be like, no, this isn't for me. So I wanted to just kind of take over and have more of a conversation this week. But if you have any questions that you have from that sermon, from that message, make sure that you message us because we would love to answer those questions. So Pastor Scott preached about cultural Christianity. He used the text from John chapter 8 with Jesus talking to people, and it was actually people who believed, but he gave this example of cultural Christianity and how that's different from Christianity is that it's more that we don't actually allow what God is trying to do to like transform our lives. We maybe do things, we kind of check boxes, we do the stuff where we might have these reasons that we hold up to God that says we're in, we're good, like, and we think everything's okay. However, we're not really allowing God's word to transform our lives. We're not fully surrendering. And so he said this point that when what we believe affects how we live, we have crossed a threshold into Christianity from cultural Christianity. Yeah. And so that's like a really good example of like how to know when you kind of cross that threshold and gone from like, well, my parents raised me in church. I went to church when I was a kid, like whatever, to I'm actually allowing what I believe and what God says and what I believe and like through his word and all that to actually affect how I'm living. So in John 8, he talks about how these people who believed, it says all these people believed. And then the very next verse, Jesus says to these people who believed, he says, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings. How do you all see that really kind of playing out in your own lives? And how can we really look at that and understand like what he means that like if we remain faithful to his teachings?
Yeah. I think my mind goes to a couple different places, but I think initially the word that sticks out to me in all of that is just the faithfulness. Because we are all going to go, so I meet with Pastor Anna every Tuesday. And we were talking this past week about seasons of life and how I don't like that word seasons because seasons kind of mean that there's a start and a finish. And there are going to be times where there's not seasons. It's just going to be life. But I think that it made me, we were talking a little bit about like that faithfulness aspect that like even in those difficult times, even in those times when things are hard, even in those times when you don't know how, you're going to pay your next bill, even in those times when you don't know where the money's going to come from, even in those times when you don't know what the diagnosis is going to be or what's going to happen, like just remaining faithful in what he has said. Yeah. I have a Post-it note on my desk, and it's been there since I started coming to Southridge almost 6 years ago. And it was one of the first sermons that Scott preached when I started coming here, and it's literally sitting back on my desk. And it says, when things don't make sense in the present, remember his faithfulness in the past.
Right.
And that's where my
good.
mind goes to when I hear this
Yeah.
of like, you're truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings. If you remain faithful to what I've taught you
Yeah.
and you remember my faithfulness, even in those difficult times, like that for me is kind of where my mind goes in that, because it's hard sometimes when you're in the midst of those struggles to be like, man, okay, he said he was going to be faithful. He's
Right.
going to be there. He's going to do this. He's going to do. It's sometimes hard when you're in the midst of those
Right.
things.
We think, where are you, God?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I see your goodness
Yeah.
in this? Where is your faithfulness?
David says
Like,
it in the
yeah.
Psalms. He's like,
Yeah.
have you forsaken me?
Right.
Like, did you forget about me?
Right.
Yeah.
But then in the same breath, he's like, but God, you are a good God, and
Yeah.
I know you're going to
Yeah.
take care of these
Right.
things. And so that's initially where my mind goes, is just it's a mind over matter thing. Like, you want to be like, oh, woe is me, but you also know like God is faithful.
Yeah.
And I can look back on so many instances in my life where like I didn't know how something was going
Right.
to turn out, but because I was faithful in what I knew and who I knew,
Right.
then I knew it was going to be okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It may not have looked like what I wanted it to look like. It may not have happened the way I wanted it to happen, but it was God's
Yeah.
will that was happening in
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely.
I think it's so important for us to know his teachings too.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
if you don't know his
Right.
teachings and what he says,
Mhm.
what he teaches us to do, how to live, how to be,
Mhm.
then we can't do these
Right.
things.
Right.
You know, so it's so
Yeah.
important to know that
Yes.
aspect first, to know Christ, to have a firm foundation in Christ, to know his word, to know the things that he's already told us about us are true.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know those things, then
Yeah.
we can't have that faith. We can't
Absolutely.
remain faithful. So, like, the key to it is having a relationship with Christ from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, and if there's anything standing in the way, breaking those barriers to build that relationship.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think that is so great. And I think it's one of those things that, like, we're able to stay faithful because we do serve a faithful God.
Yes.
Yes.
And because we know,
Yes.
like, we're not the first ones to have those moments and those
Nope.
thoughts and those things.
Yeah.
If we know the teachings and we
Yes.
know that we're not alone in those feelings and in those moments, but to also see like how God has provided for
Yeah.
them and knowing that he's still the same God today as he's always
That's-
been.
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about
And
that right
so-
now with
Yeah.
the kids.
Yeah.
Is like our theme for this month is throwback, and we're
Yeah.
talking about how God's word
Yep. his
doesn't
teachings.
change.
Yep.
He's the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yes.
It does not change. There is nothing about what he has said
Right.
or what he's going to say
Yeah.
Mhm.
that is going to change. It is
Right.
going
Yeah.
to be the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yeah.
And that's like we've talked about, like everything changes. We
Yeah.
know that, but the one thing that is always the same is God,
Yeah.
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
not going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so good. And like to remember that, to know that like if we know his truth, what you were saying,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the next verse says, you will know the truth and
Yep.
the truth will set you
Yep.
free.
Yeah.
If you don't know the truth, you can't be free in that
Exactly.
because you don't know
Yeah.
him. And so like Pastor Scott talked about how like truth is God's wise stewardship and order of things. Truth is the way things are meant to be as designed by the creator. But in our culture, it is, we have this very much like this big idea of, well, this is my truth. This
Yeah.
is my whatever.
Yeah.
Because, and some things, sometimes it's even that, well, this has been taught to me as truth.
Yeah.
And so, like, I can't tell you the amount of people who said, I'm sorry. Like, okay, we're all three women called
Yeah.
to ministry, obviously. Okay. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had people, like, look at me to my face and say, I'm sorry. I don't believe in female pastors. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And then they go on to say, it's just the way I was raised. It's the way
Yeah.
my mama was raised. It's the way my grandma was raised. And
Yep.
I'm like, okay, but have you ever, like, dug deeper
Yep.
into
Yeah.
that, like, for yourself?
Yeah.
So there's things that, like, some things we just make up and some things are kind of passed on
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
idea, and we don't seek it out ourselves to know those truths. And in those moments that we're living that truth, like he says, like, we think that leads to freedom, but in those moments, it's not true freedom.
Yeah.
It's a false freedom. It may feel free in the moment,
Yeah.
but it really leads to bondage.
Yeah.
in the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yep.
so what are some things like maybe that you all have experienced or even had in your own journey of faith where you've like thought, oh, this is true, or this is, this is something that I think to be true that has caused you to maybe even realize that it's not fully true, or has led you maybe down a path that ended up creating some bondage in your life that wasn't true freedom? Kind of a deep personal question. Sorry.
It's fine.
Oh, gosh. I've got to think for a second. I think the thing that comes to my mind first off is, well, for starters, Scott and I obviously are brother and sister. So we were raised in the same upbringing. We had all of those things. So I will say, coming from where I came from, some of the stuff that Scott has taught, that's not the way we were,
Right.
that's not what we were taught growing up. So that has been very eye-opening. I loved the Leaving Behind, Left Behind series.
Yes.
Loved that series because we did grow up in a, like, if you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, like those Left Behind movies and those things, like that is what you thought. Like Scott and I were on this group called the Impact Team. And we would go around singing that people get ready. Jesus is coming. Soon you'll be. We sang that in churches. Like, we sing those things. And Scott's like, oh, my gosh, I can't stand that song. Like, but it's things like that. But that's what we knew. Like, that's what we were taught. That, that. And then I will never forget. So I went to seminary in Kansas City. And I went to college church, which was not college church. Sorry. I went to Kansas City First Church of the Nazarene. And so when I went there, a lot of my Sunday school teachers and things like that, this was when I was I had just graduated college. So I was 21, 22. And a lot of my professors were a lot of my professors at seminary went to church with me as well. And so I had two that were seminary professors, but were also my Sunday school teachers. And I remember them starting to kind of break down some of these like truths that we think that we've known our whole life. And one of them was, God will never give you more than you can handle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it was like that. And I remember Dr. David, his name was David. I can't remember what his last name was. But David was like, that is the biggest lie that we've ever been told.
Yeah.
Because we're always going to have more than we can handle.
Yeah.
We're never going to have more than what we can handle with him because he is who we have to invite into that situation and into those moments. And I remember sitting there thinking, I've heard that my entire life.
Yeah.
Like, God is never going to give you more than you can handle, but I feel like I'm drowning.
Yeah. And back to like what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
You grow up believing that truth. And then the moment that thing happens, that you
melt
can't,
down.
It's like, wait.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, I don't believe in God anymore because I was told this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now this has happened and these things don't match up.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot, and I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's where a lot of that, like, disbelief comes in, is in those moments where you have this mindset of this is what it should look like. Like, I just immediately think of my grandma and like, her life. I mean, she had a really awful hand dealt to her. I mean, the things that she had experienced throughout life were just awful. But 6 weeks before she died, someone asked her what was the hardest thing she'd ever experienced, and she said she hadn't experienced it yet.
Oh,
And that, to me, was just a testament to her faith and who she was. But I have family members who still to this day refuse to step foot in a church building because they can't believe that a God who my grandma said was so good would take her away.
Right.
And they refuse to have anything to do with church.
Yeah.
And I think it's because that truth is a different truth. It's a different understanding. It's a different mindset of what they see. And it has become a bondage to them.
Absolutely.
And I mean, we pray all the time. Like, I would love to see them get into church and to do those things and to, find their faith.
Yeah.
We're going to continue to pray that.
Yeah.
But their truth is so blurred in what they think and what is true.
Yeah. And Albert Tate wrote a book called Disobedient God, and it's about those types of things. Like, what do you do when, like, the God who you know as a healer doesn't heal? Like, what do you do in those moments? And I haven't fully read it, but it's been good so far. So, like, if you're dealing with something like that, I think that would be a great resource to look at.
Yeah.
But then, like, I know that, like, we have had moments in our story where maybe we didn't, like, you are fairly newer to faith.
Yes.
I know, like, I have been a Christian since I was a young kid, but then I did have my moment where I believed different truths for a while.
Yeah.
I realized, like, the point that I was able to come back to God was a point where I realized that the truths that I was believing about myself were not actually the truths that the Creator who made me believed about me.
Yeah.
And in that moment, like, I experienced true freedom and have come from there. But, like, you are the newest of us to faith. So, like, how does this really apply to you and your story?
So whenever I just think about, whenever I grew up, we went to church. My grandmother took us to church. Any chance I was staying with her, she would take me to church. We would sit in the back row. I would go downstairs to Sunday school. She would teach the Sunday school. She really had an impact on why I'm here right now doing this, because she was the only one who really made an effort to teach me about Jesus, okay? And as I grew older, I literally just shied away. And now that I'm here, I see so many things that I was taught that are not true. One, women can't pastor. That was like one of the big things I first noticed whenever I came here, because I was like, Cheryl's up there. Jess is in the back. I thought,
we had this conversation in my group last night, because they were like, this was the first place I'd ever been to where I saw a female pastor, and I was like, wait.
Just like a year ago, my mom and I were somewhere at like a Christian concert, and this lady comes up and she's like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm a pastor in the area." And then she's shaking my mom's hand and then stops mid conversation and was like, "Wait a minute, do you believe in that?" And my mom was like, "What?" It took my mom by complete shock. She didn't know what to do.
Pastor Scott, your brother, is always like, when people say that to you, like, I don't believe it. Do you ever want to be like,
do you see me standing here?
Do you see me? Like, because, but yeah, that's a big thing. But the person in my group was like, but then I went and I was like, well, you see stories of women leading and doing things in the scriptures. So then we were like, okay. But
so
a lot of people don't do that.
Something that really stuck out to me was the people who found Jesus were women. Yeah. Like, who went to the empty tomb were women. You know what I mean? The first ones to encounter the resurrected Jesus was women. Yep. You know what I mean? So to say that women can't spread the message, can't be a part of God's kingdom in that way, it just doesn't make sense. They were literally the ones who went and told that he is resurrected. So anyway, that was one of the things. And another big thing was I had no idea what God had already said about me. You know what I mean? Like, what he already had said I am. Like, I'm already chosen. Yeah. Like, I'm already these things. I'm already loved. Like, and I had felt for a long time that I wasn't loved. Right. You know what I mean?
And so we seek that out in other ways. And that's where I think that truth ends up leading to that bondage. We feel free in that moment. Like, I can feel loved by, sleeping with this guy, doing that, like, whatever. Yeah.
It's like it's that God-sized hole that, like, you try to stick all these other things in and it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But I think that's so good to remember, because, like, I mean, you live in the Bible Belt. Yeah. Like, you know what I'm saying? You went to church as a kid. Yeah. But yet you were an adult who had no idea what God actually said about you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought I just had to go to church on Sundays.
Yeah.
Just go to church on Sundays. On the holidays, you dress nice, come in, praise, go home, take your little nap. Drink in the evenings, party all week. You know what I mean? That's what I thought. And then Sundays you start over, and that was the only day made for God, and that's not. Yeah. That's cultural
Christianity.
Yeah, right? That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's such a great insight and thought, like, to have where we come from, such different, unique perspectives, and I think that is something that we have to remember, because then even within that, like. He says, cultural Christians are not concerned with all sin, only some sins. Yeah. Like these certain issues or these hot topics. We got into this in my group a little bit last night about how, like, we'll talk about certain things, like we'll talk about the LGBTQ community or whatever, but then we forget that, like, people who are living together and having sex before they're married, that's sexual sin too. Yeah. Like, it's under the same umbrella of this is sexual sin. And so we get on these hot topics of certain things.
Pick and choose type thing.
Or we'll talk about, our body is a temple. We shouldn't tattoo her. We shouldn't do, like, we get into these things. It's like, well, that's a whole other thing for a whole nother day. Yeah. But, like, we'll talk about certain things. We shouldn't smoke. We shouldn't do drugs. We shouldn't whatever. Or we shouldn't get drunk. But then, like, the person saying those things, maybe, like, I mean, I'm overweight. Like, you know what I mean? And if my body's a temple, like, that's just as important too. Like, I mean, there are some health issues and things that can contribute to that stuff, but like we'll get on these certain topics, but forget that like there's a lot more to it than that.
It's like it's that sliding scale. It's like, it makes me think of the quote in remember the Titans, when he's like, you're flirting with the line, like you're right there. It's like you're flirting with it. Like you're I can do this, but I can go right up here to this line.
How far is
too far? Like I'm going to go right up here to this line. I'm not going to do this, or this, but that I'll do.
Yeah. Like I'll never forget. So my youth mentor gave me this book. I think she gave me this book, or maybe I found the book. I think she gave me the book, but it was a book about like sex and things like that for teens, and it talked about all the other things other than just intercourse. And like, because I think that that's something that you know, a lot of people with those types of stuff, like they go to a certain point, but the further in you get to that, the further you go and closer you get to like the big thing. But I remember like reading this book as a teen and being like, nobody ever talks about these things.
No.
Like, nobody talks about all the other stuff that leads to that. Like, and I think, because we want to focus on the main big thing. You shouldn't have sex. Like, you know, but then you have teens who are like, but what about this? What about that? What about that? But they're too scared to ask those questions. And so, like, we focus on these really big main things, but don't go deeper in it, or don't really understand that there's more to it than that. Like that whole idea of, well, can't believe kids can't pray in school. Well, kids can. Okay. Your kids can. Your kids can lead a Bible study at school. Teachers can't. It's different. But we'll get into that mindset, but then, like, we're not praying with them at home. We're not leading them to know and understand that they can do that themselves at school, like, that they can lead the way in those things. And it's that idea of, like, we look at that big thing, but we forget, okay, well, this has been banned. So now what can we do that's still okay, but actually leads our kids to even do things in a better way? Like, because I mean, we did a Bible study at my school when I was in high school.
We had FCA.
We had FCA. Like, our group, like, there was a group of us that we would meet together at lunch, or, like, in the morning we would spend time doing prayer together. And then, like, at lunch, we always, like, our table, we would rotate who would lead the prayer for lunch, like, you know, and check in with each other and do those things. And that's really, like, that's closer to discipleship than, like, somebody leading a morning prayer over the whole school. So anyway, he then went on to talk about, like, these things, because the people that Jesus was talking to, they went on to be like, what do you mean we're not free? We're descendants of Abraham. What do you mean like this? We've never been slaves. Well, God is our Father. And they're, like, holding up these different things to Jesus, saying, like, no, we're good. And Scott gave us some examples of that in his teaching on Sunday. But, like, what are some things that maybe we personally have either held up ourselves or have seen by those close to us that have been held up to God as, like, this idea that, well, I do this, or I'm this, so I must be good. And kind of we hold that in that place and think, like, well, no, I don't need to do this because I'm doing this. What are some of those things for you all?
So that's funny you say that. I just spoke to somebody the other day, because me personally, since I've started interning, I'm like, oh, I'm doing stuff here. So, and I'm reading and preparing messages for my group, or I'm putting something together for the kids on Sunday, or I'm doing this, and we're praying together in here, you know, so it's like, I'm okay not to do my Bible study today. You know what I mean? And I was like, and I went to lay down the other night, and I was like, because I was like, yeah, God, I'm still doing it. I'm still good. And he literally told me, girl, you are not good. He was like, I swear, he was like, you're not spending time with me. And I was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, Aleigha, you know. Like, you know, like, you're not keeping your relationship with us. Like, just like a marriage, you want to be with your husband or your wife or whatever, you got to spend time together one-on-one. Like, you can't just do it in a group setting.
Yeah. Well, because those things, like, you're doing those things, but it's all still part of the doing and not part of the being with. We go through that.
Yes. What was the emotionally healthy
spirituality?
No. Discipleship. Yes.
Emotionally Healthy Discipleship by Pete Scazzaro. And he talks about this aspect of being with,
doing
like
for
this aspect of being before doing, and this being with before doing. And like, we have our roles here.
Yeah.
We have a lot of doing for. And in that doing for, it can feel like we are being with.
Yeah.
And you do have those moments, obviously, like when you're leading worship, like you're with God, but you're also doing for.
Yeah.
But like, you still need that truly just being with outside of the doing for tasks.
Yeah.
Because it then again does get in that task. And I think like each of us have probably gone through that. Those moments where we're like,
she and I were talking about that the other day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she was like, I was like, no, listen, I get it, because that's where, I mean, you know this, and she knows this because I told her, but like, that's where I was last year. I was in that, like, this time last year, I was in that, like, being with mentality, or that doing mentality, and not the being with mentality, because I was exhausted. I was burnt out.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? I am literally, it is good just to get up and be here. Like, we are doing good. And I mean, we do. I think we go through those times where we're like, we're good. Like, we're going to church on Sunday mornings, where, you know, we're praying here and there. Like, you know, I was like, God, please be with me in traffic. Like, you know, and like, I think he even said yesterday, like, it's like, it might have been one of the quotes. It was like that Jesus take the wheel type thing.
Yeah, that would, like, it's a Jesus take the wheel in a moment of crisis.
But but then
every
other day, it's like, whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get it. Like, I've been there. I've definitely seen the difference that makes. It makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in my attitude. It makes a difference in my relationships with other people. I mean, it changes everything from that doing for and being with. Yeah. And there are days where it's easier than others, and there are moments when it's easier than others. And then there's times where I'm just like, girl, you got to get it together. Yeah. Like, you know what you're supposed to be doing, and you're not doing it. Yeah. And I mean, I can tell a difference. I can definitely tell a difference. But I also think it's funny too. And I've heard people say, like, I've not done this, but I do think it's funny. Like, one of the things that I have seen people do is, like, you get your tattoos, you get all these things, and it's like these Bible verses all over you. And I will never forget. So I have Philippians 4:13 on my foot, and it's, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. The reason that I have that on my foot is because it was my grandmother's favorite Bible verse. And so I had someone ask me one day, oh, you got a Bible verse on your foot. What's it even mean? And so I tell them, like, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And they looked at me, they're like, I'm surprised you knew that. And I was like, what? They're like, well, no, most of the time that, like, when people have like verses on them, they don't know what it actually means. Yeah. Like, I've asked people before and they didn't know what it means, and they just put it on there because it was like a quote. Yeah. And I'm like, it's not a quote. It, like, what? Yeah. And so I actually had someone tell me that one time. Yeah. And so it always made me laugh. And I was like, no, like, that, why would you put something random on a, like, why would you wear a shirt if you don't know what it means? Or
do lots
of
things.
You know,
well, that's like, I don't like to get or buy anything that has a different language, like, especially like things like Chinese or like Hebrew, things like that, like, it's more symbol type, because I'm always so nervous that it's not going to say what I think it is. But I think
that says hungry.
Like, this thing is with Scripture and what Jesus teaches us. Is that like, so many times we think it's saying one thing. Yeah. It's really not. It's saying something totally different. Yeah. Yeah. And so what you think that it means is something totally different. And that's where I think, like, the offense tends to come in, because, okay, let's get real here for a minute. Nobody likes their intelligence to be questioned. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Nobody likes their integrity to be questioned. Yeah. Nobody likes their reputation to come into question. Okay. It's not an easy thing when those things end up happening, but it's those moments where, like, if you're open to it, like God telling you, girl, you're not good.
Mm-hmm.
You could have immediately in that been like, or, after been like, whatever, God, I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
I am doing these things,
Yeah.
but you allowed yourself to be open to it in that
Oh,
moment
yeah.
to say, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm going to fix this.
Yeah.
I remember a moment for me where I was like praying to God and like, God, why do I always end up in these bad relationships? Like, why does this kind of thing happen to me? Like, why does whatever? And I heard him say, because you allow it to.
Yeah.
And I pulled off the side. I was driving. I had to pull off the side of the road. I was like, God, excuse me?
What did you just say?
He's like, because you allow it to. And I'm like, what do you mean I allow it to?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want this to happen to me.
Yep.
And then, it was almost like, I don't know, it was this weird experience where I begin to have these memories called to mind of like the moments where I knew one thing and I chose to do another.
Oh, yeah.
I was told one thing and I chose to do a different thing.
Yep.
And it was like these moments, all this became clear, and I was like, oh, dang.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're right.
No, I
And now it's easy.
I think we
I'm
all have
falling on the side of the road.
Okay,
at this point.
so this was we won't give a timeline, but because that's too much. We won't give a timeline. Anyways, so but
People
I've
are gonna
had
be like,
this.
"This is
They're
such
like,
a
"Ooh,
different
what's a
extra point."
timeline?" But no,
Yeah.
that something similar has happened to me in that, like, obviously I'm single and not married and no children and whatever. And this was a while ago. And I remember, like, I had been walking through this devotional and was like journaling every day and like just really in a good place mentally, in a good place with God, like spiritually was great, all of these things. And we were on vacation and there was a gentleman that was in my life that I thought, okay, well, maybe this is something. I don't know. And I am taking a shower and I verbally hear, not this one. And I'm like, what the heck? Where did that just come from? What is happening? Yeah. And I remember getting out of the shower and I was like, what in the world do you mean, not this one?
Yeah.
And I questioned God so many times in that. Like, you mean not this one now? Not this one yet?
Right. Yeah.
Not this one today?
Right.
Or
like,
what exactly do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know now, like, we're on the other side of this now, but I know now it was no, like, it was a not this one. Like, that is not who I have for you.
Yeah.
Listen, because had I listened, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache and a lot of tears and a lot of hurt and brokenness, but I didn't because I didn't listen.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments where I did hear it. I mean, I verbally heard it and I was like, wait, what was that?
Yeah.
And I chose not to listen. And I paid the consequences for that.
Yeah.
Like, I was miserable.
Yeah.
But it also, now that I am past all of that, it also is one of those things, like, I look back on that and I'm like, that is also now something that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Because, like, in that, it wasn't a, no, this isn't going to happen for you.
Yeah.
It was a, not this one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is something that I can hold on to in going back to that faithfulness of God.
Yeah.
In that not this one means that there is one. And I don't know who that is, but he does.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And so, but it's in those moments where it's like you have to
say,
have a little
God,
bit of
I've been waiting forever.
Yeah, but God,
I've been really
I'm
good. I
old.
haven't been like all these other people. You could say, I haven't been like all these other people out there running around doing all these crazy things. Like, I've been faithful to you, God. I've done this. Like, when? Who? Now? Come on.
Yeah.
Like, but I think we do that. Like, I remember feeling some of those things, like when I had a miscarriage.
Yeah.
Like, and then I found out this person's pregnant again after, a couple abortions and other things. And I'm like, but God, like, and I'm holding up all these things.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm
that,
like,
but it's in those moments where it's like, and for me at least, it's in those moments where I'm like, I knew what he meant.
Right.
I knew what he meant. There was truth in what he said, but it was my own stubbornness. It was my own, like, my own bondage that we're talking about, like in that truth will set you free mentality. It was that my own bondage, my own like self-sabotage
Yeah.
that was like trying to justify it to where it made sense for
Yeah.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. It didn't need to make sense
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
It was God was saying something to me and I needed to listen and I didn't.
Yeah.
And because of that, I was miserable. Like
Yeah.
it was awful. It was awful. But again, now that I'm past all of that and in a completely different space, like I can look back and see like his faithfulness in so many things during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you're in the midst of it, it's sometimes hard to see.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, though, that's like where the Israelites were here. Like the people that Jesus was talking to, they're like, in that moment, they don't get, like, they're not getting it. And it can.
That we've never been
create
slaves to
that,
anyone.
like,
Are you kidding me? Like
that angry, offensive reaction. Because in that moment, we're feeling things. And sometimes it's easier to react in that way than it is to really feel it. Like, and really see, okay, what is he actually saying to me here?
Yeah.
What do I need to fix in my life in this moment? And how can I correlate what he's saying in this moment, even though it hurts and it stinks and it's not great? How can I take that and instead of holding up all these things as reasons or excuses or whatever to get what we think we deserve, which, and really trade it out, because I think that's where, them in this moment, like they're so deceived by what they think is good or what they think is right or whatever that they cannot, they don't have room for in their heart for this truth in that moment.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think, like, if we're not careful, we easily get to that place too in our faith and in our journey with Christ, is that we can allow ourselves to get to this place where we don't allow any open areas for God to really get in there. We close it off. We, whatever, to where we are not allowing that. I think openness is like this huge place to be in. Like of importance. I can't tell you, like the moments that I've had some of the greatest like breakthroughs or ideas or like whatever is when I've just like been drained and totally like, I got nothing else, but I'm just gonna sit here, God, like with you and whatever. But I think in those moments, like there's more of an openness and an ability for him to like really allow what he wants to enter into our lives. And that's where like it's this living this life of openness. I think is huge in this aspect to, if you need a minute, like you need a few days, you need a week or a month, like to really process something. He's teaching you, because I know we had our moment where we had some prayer time and whatever on Sunday, but like by the time you're hearing this, it's Wednesday and you've had a few days. Like maybe your initial reaction was anger or offense. And now maybe after a few days, you can go and be like, oh, okay, let me try to hear this again. And so I hope that, like, if you're listening to this and you were in that place on Sunday where you didn't want to hear, you didn't want to ever, like, that you can go back and maybe hear it again and really try to understand, like, that, the heart of where Pastor Scott was coming from. Because I think it's easy for us to even sit in those seats and be like, well, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know my story. How can he say these things? And I want to tell you, like, because I helped read his notes beforehand, like, he was burdened by this. Like, he didn't want to do this, and I think that's a lot of times in our life, like, in our walk, like, there are things that God asks us to do that we don't want to do.
It's not easy.
Like, it's not easy. I mean, it's not, but when you are truly following Christ, regardless of the cost, you're going to do the things he calls you to do, and it may cost. Like, I read one of the messages that he had received through our texting service, actually. I'd read one of those messages, and I remember reading it and thinking, oh, I hope he doesn't get this before the next service. Like, I hope he doesn't see this. Because I thought, like, man, like, some people can be bold in what they say. Like, these people wanted to stone Jesus. Like, that's where they were. And they failed to hear this part about how a slave's not a permanent member of the family, but a son is part of the family forever.
That's
and
good.
like that the son can set you free. If the son sets you free, you're truly free. That like what we have through Christ is this ability to become members of God's family, to be truly free and part of his family forever. And that's like, we have a Father who loves us so much.
Yeah.
Who has done so much to allow us to be part of that family, to bridge the gap, to take the things that we actually deserve upon himself, so that way we don't have to.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's at stake here. And if we keep ourselves closed off, if we keep our hearts hard, we don't allow ourselves to have that transformation.
Yeah.
And it's such a transformation. Like, it's not just, a transformation of in that moment. It's like, it's forever.
Yeah.
If you allow it to be. And if you are faithful. Like, and that's so cool.
Yeah. So many times I think we take those beliefs that we've been told and we shove them in there. And like you said, there's no room for Jesus to get in. And like, no matter how many times he's knocking, he's there, he's giving you signs, he's sending people, speaking through people to you. It's like you don't want to hear it because you're so blinded and or hurt from past church. Like, it doesn't, there's so many things that block that off. If you would just surrender and be vulnerable for just a little bit, he can get in there and work and truly set you free, because I think so many of us haven't experienced true freedom.
Right.
Because we don't know God's word. We don't truly know Christ, and as soon as we figure him out, we figure out who he is and what his purpose was, what he came for, and what he's still doing, we'll be set free, and we'll have that, all those things cleansed from us. The burdens we carry, everything will be erased because we'll be filled with him,
And I think it's scary. Like, that kind of level, it's scary.
Oh,
You
yeah.
don't know what's going to happen.
Oh,
And
yeah.
It's like,
We like to
wait, you want me
control
to
things.
daily
Yeah, we want the
follow
control.
him
Yeah.
regardless of the cost?
Yeah.
Like, that can be scary to
Oh,
not
yeah.
know what the cost is.
Yeah.
But he promises to be with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
He promised us victory in
Yeah.
the end. Like,
Yeah.
and I think so many people fear it because they've never really truly lived.
Yeah.
Because they haven't died to their past self.
Yeah,
to
that's
allow
right.
their new life to come, to be able to experience life with Christ.
Yeah.
And so,
He does promise, like, that we're going to have trials and
Yes,
tribulations.
exactly.
It says
Through
in this
this,
world you
right.
will have trouble.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
But
we
take
can have,
heart.
and
Take
we
heart.
may have peace. He's overcame the world.
Yes.
Yeah,
We
but
may
take
have
heart
peace.
because I've come
Yes.
to overcome it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can only find that through him. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So good. So, we hope that this has helped you some. Maybe hearing some of our stories has helped you realize that maybe you're not too far off from some of those things that Pastor Scott was talking about either. I hope that you're open to what God has been trying to speak through this series and what he's going to continue to speak this next Sunday. We have Compassion Sunday, and so we'll be sharing about how Jesus teaches us to care for those that are in this world. And so we'll be back with some more practical next steps for you again next week.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.